How do you write a sequel when the original film is already considered a masterpiece? And how do you create new characters who feel just as iconic and emotionally real as Joy, Sadness, and Bing Bong?
Somebody said to me, nobody likes Joy. You gotta fix that, nobody likes her.
And what if one of those new emotions is inspired by Christopher Nolan's assistant?
I always thought about anxiety as Christopher Nolan's assistant.
That's the kind of pressure LeFauve and Dave Holstein were under when Pixar asked them to write Inside Out 2. Meg was returning to a world she helped create. Only this time, the emotional stakes were even higher.
In the first movie, we asked Joy to step back. In this movie, she was going to have to step forward. And what does that mean?
Dave, meanwhile, had never written animation before. He came from shows like Weeds and Kidding, and suddenly found himself at Pixar, where he ended up writing hundreds of pages, constantly reworking and refining the story from the ground up.
I think I wrote 700, 800 pages in this movie.
I'm Pietro Schito, and I had the honor, and yes, the nerves, of hosting this conversation at the Animationist Film Festival. And what I heard from Meg and Dave changed the way I think about storytelling. From discovering that Pixar's creative process starts with tossing out pages that already work.
You write and you write and you write, and then they toss it out and you go again, and they write and they write and they write, and then they say, okay, let's put it up. Okay, out it goes.
To how real-life anxiety, parenting, and even middle school Spanish class shaped some of the most emotional moments in the film. This is the kind of behind-the-scenes look that reminds you that storytelling is personal, vulnerable, and sometimes downright brutal.
This is a nightmare!
Stick around until the end, unless you're Christopher Nolan's assistant. In that case, maybe just skip the video. Everyone else, you're gonna love it. I would like to start with the uniqueness of writing for animation and the fact that, Dave, you come from live action and you got into Pixar. Meg, you already had the experience with the amazing first film. And starting with Dave, how was your experience getting into the studio, coming from your TV background and live action into Pixar?
I don't think I've ever picked an easy job. And I think that that prepared me for Pixar. It's I think I've described it like writing a screenplay inside a dishwasher while it's on. And I've worked on a lot of projects from musicals to I did a TV show on Showtime with Jim Carrey. That was its own creative sandbox with a lot of challenges and et cetera. And I feel like it's those kind of very creative, very challenging projects that prepare you for what Pixar does.
And Meg, you've been at Pixar before, and I would love if you could tell us how is the process, because it's very unique, and the collaboration between you as a writer, the directors, maybe starting from your first experience and then coming back in Inside Out 2.
Well, in terms of the movies, it's the same experience. I mean, different directors, but as a writer, your job is to work with that director. I think this is true of live action too. Your job is to help that director tell their story. But to do that, you have to find something deep enough, emotionally deep enough for you to also tell your story within that, meaning it's about the human condition. So you can bring your own life and life experience to it. So for example, in the first movie, when Riley came home at the end and basically said to her parents, "You want me to be happy, but I'm not," that was very much my experience. As an 11-year-old girl, Riley was brave enough to say it to her parents. So it's personal, but it's always the director leading. It's their vision. It was Pete's vision. It's Kelsey's vision. So you start with that director. Eventually, artists do come in and start drawing what you're writing. And then it's a very long process. It's a 5-year process.
And for you, Dave, you probably knew about Pixar in general. How was the feeling of getting into the studio and getting to collaborate with the rest of the crew?
I mean, I loved it. I love the collaborative environment. It's very much like television in a lot of ways. You know, you have a showrunner or a director whose vision you're there to serve and to help, and you have all these great resources. You have just rooms full of people who have amazing artistic skill, and you have other writers who work there who you can go knock on their door. It's a very collaborative campus. It's exciting to have that much at your fingertips.
I'm curious about what us as individual writers can take home from the way the Pixar works and the things that maybe you've learned that weren't part of your routine and that you brought back to your own writing later. Is there anything that comes to mind?
Oh yeah. I mean, Pixar is a campus full of artists, and artists have grown up drawing in sketchbooks since they probably could hold a pencil. And I'm sure at home they're stacked to the ceilings of their bedrooms and attics. So they're very iterative, right? So you write and you write and you write, and then they toss it out and you go again, and they write and they write and they write, and then they say, okay, let's put it up. Okay, out it goes, what stays. So it really taught me that I think a lot of emerging writers, including myself when I was there, you believe there's a well inside of you that has like an inch of water. So when you write your script, you're like, but that's a good scene. I did it. I wrote a good scene and people are telling me that it's good. And now you're telling me I might have to throw it out? And it's like, yes, I am. Because it's not an inch of water, it's an ocean. And that's what Pixar taught me, is that you have to be brave enough to take what you've written and really just iterate it again, because any note you have in the script is coming back to that first act. And it's coming back to the engine of your story. And if you don't, it's like a disease with symptoms. And if you don't really go deep and really look at your story in a very deep way and be willing to throw everything out, you'll just get, and you go in, and let's say you go in and you open your document again and you just noodle around in there. You're just changing the symptoms and you'll just get new symptoms. You have to really, at Pixar, what I learned the most is after the screening, you never go back and open that old document, ever. You go back to outlining. You go back to carding. You go back to having to pitch the new version. And then you open a blank document and you write again. And so that kind of iterative process is hard, but it's actually faster. You think it's slower, but it's faster.
The writer, Tracy Letts, who's a great playwright and screenwriter, deletes his files between every draft and goes back and starts over, and that felt very Pixar-y to me. I think iteration is certainly a key thing at Pixar, and you're constantly rewriting. I think I wrote 700, 800 pages in this movie. I think something specifically that I learned a lot about was dialogue and animation. I think the human body can only intake so much information, and I think that in live action, I like to write long, monologue-y, floral, if mind you, dialogue. And in animation, I found that all of that was fighting the frame, because there's so much to take in visually in these movies that simpler dialogue was going a lot further. And that was surprising to me in a good early lesson.
Every time I talk with the amazing talent from the studio, being them directors or story artists, it's very embedded into the culture of, writing is rewriting and storyboarding is also writing. And you get so much from the story artists as well to get in onto the page. The second thing that I've noticed is that they really nurture the idea of the more personal, the more universal. And you mentioned that. What is the most personal thing or element and feelings and maybe something from your past that you brought into the film?
Well, I was an anxious girl, so that was very easy for me to access. We wrote a lot of it during COVID, so anxiety was everywhere. So we were able to access that. I'm the mom of a child who has some anxiety. So I understood how Joy was feeling in terms of how do you help your kid? And the answer is sometimes you can't directly. You have to let them move through their own emotional experience. And I would say, things that I did for my own anxiety. So for example, for years and years, even before I wrote the first one, if I got overwhelmed with anxiety before a meeting, I would close my eyes and I would imagine a little red chair. And I would say, first of all, thank you, anxiety. I know you're trying to help me, right? Because you can't cut a piece of yourself out. That piece is coming up to help you. But I'm not going to die, anxiety. This is not happening. All these projections that you're throwing at me, none of it's happening. So could you just take a seat and see, I'm going to be okay. And I did that for years. So when Kelsey pitched to me this idea of anxiety taking over, I knew where we were going to end. I knew that could be something for what is a healthy way to handle your anxiety, because she's not wrong. She's just doing it. Her plan is off. And certainly the projections, and we talked for days and days about weeks and weeks, months and months, right? About anxiety and how it manifests, and we did tons of research. So you have to be brave enough to bring something that almost would embarrass you, because that's when you're really getting very deep into something. And you feel very vulnerable talking about it, even just in a room, let alone putting it out to millions of people. But what's interesting is it may feel embarrassing and make you feel vulnerable, but in fact, that's going to be what connects to people and makes them feel seen, because you're the artist who has to be the brave one into the breach.
When I was in high school, middle school, I had a really bad speech impediment. I had a stutter. And my worst part of the week was Spanish class, because when I had to read out loud in Spanish class, there were a lot of words in Spanish that begin with that A. And that would always trigger my stuttering. And I did not look forward to that class. And there was something about this idea that a 40-minute Spanish class can feel like the end of the world, that the stakes are that high when you're in middle school. And applying that to Riley, who feels that a 3-day hockey camp could affect the rest of her life, felt like a way to engage a story where you can find your own world-specific stakes, that they're high stakes to the character. They're not necessarily she's on a space station that's slowly leaking fuel, that there's something about putting that pressure on yourself as a kid that felt like it would give us the high stakes, worthy of a sequel to the first movie.
And the trick of that stakes, right, is that you have to, in the first act, convince the audience that that's real, right? Like the audience can't be thinking, come on, honey, it's 2 days in a camp, you're fine, right? And we had to do that in the first movie. I remember when Pete said he thought maybe this was about sadness. And I was like, oh my gosh, everybody walking into the movie is going to have had a good cry. Like, Joy believes sadness should not drive. That's a really big idea for Joy to have. And if you look at the first act, we're brainwashing you to convince you that as cute as she is, she really shouldn't drive, right? So your first act is kind of brainwashing the audience into the emotional point of view and beliefs of the main character, so that as they change through Act 2, the audience is starting to wake up too. So when they hit that end of Act 2, that kind of conscious moment of, oh, wow, I'm wrong. That thing I thought was true in Act 1 is wrong. The audience can have that experience too.
And so let's start watching some clips, because we got some clips specifically from the first act, which is one of the I would say one of the hardest things to figure out, to set the story in motion, to bring everybody on. And the first one is an important element that then will pays off later. So let's run the first clip, and it's something that Joy created.
There's that brainwashing.
Exactly.
So what are taking a step back on like a general first act? What are the goals for a writer to establish during the first act while introducing the character, the world, and the main conflict?
It's a big question. For me, and again, everyone approaches writing differently. So please, these aren't rules. You're just seeing, a view into my head. And Dave may have a very different way of doing
it.
Mine are
rules.
There's no rules. So for me, the first thing I have to know is, are we writing a transformative character? Joy is a transformative character. She's going to realize, oh shit, I'm wrong. Right? Or is she a claiming character? Let's say Moana. Moana's right. Her I Want song is right. She doesn't know how to do it, and she doesn't realize how powerful she is, right? So her end of Act 2 is more like, no, he's not going to do it, you're going to do it. So it's claiming her power. Or does your character not change? But really what they're doing is changing the entire world. So you can think of Aaron Brockovich, you can think of, there's characters who they really stay pretty steady, but everybody around them has changed from having come into contact with them. So the first thing I have to know is, what are we doing? And it can change. But if you're doing a transformative character, it's really, I look for the poles of the character. She's going to start here in Act 1, and she's going to see the world this way. She's going to see herself this way, her relationships in a certain way, and she's going to have a certain goal based on those relationships or a problem that she has. And then at the end of Act 2, she will wake up to, oh, that was wrong, right? I mean, joy really causes... I know that anxiety comes in, but joy, sending things to the back of the mind, is just like anxiety, right? She has to wake up to what she's causing. So once I have those poles, we can play in between. And my husband worked for Harrison Ford once, and he literally asked him this question, like, Tell me where I start and tell me where I finish. And then as an actor, I'll play in between. But what are those poles? So that's generally how I start. And the other last thing I'll say, and then I'll let Dave talk, is it's really, really important that your character want something. I think a lot of female writers have a challenge with this because we're enculturated to make sure we know what everybody else wants. But that's not your job as a writer for your character, especially if she's female. And I mean in the plot, like what does she want in the plot to kind of drive her? And so this back of the mind was a way to brainwash you into joy, thinking this is a good idea. That's why Sadness is saying things like, you take such good care of Riley, right? That's all trying to get the audience into that this is a good idea for Joy to be doing this. So it's having that driving want that's so important that the audience wants it too. And that can be such an important engine, and what's their plan to get it so that you can start subverting that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I subscribe to all of that. I think that one thing I'll add is Act 1 is often about creating a story engine that will give you enough gas in the tank to have a full film. It's about establishing a big enough problem or a big enough want that feels like it will have the most satisfying journey. I'm a big believer in the math of storytelling. And what Meg's talking about with polls, and you're going to start a character here. Well, if you start her here, what does that mean is the most satisfying end place for that person? And I think that the math between sort of it's sort of a sinusoidal graph. It's like you go high, low, and then high, low, and it's like if you're going to start someone here, then what is this? And then if this is this, then the climax is kind of got to be here, and the low point's like down here. I think about things very much in that mathematical term, in terms of emotion, like how much you want to feel when in a film. And I think Act 1 it gives you hopefully it lays the groundwork for the most satisfying journey.
And how do you do that practically in terms of, is that in the outlining phase and you explore all these different...
First thing I do in a note stock.
Cards.
Yeah, I mean, I even just work on my phone in a note stock, and something that feels very unofficial, because if it's too official, it'll scare me from writing. But if it feels very casual, I can trick myself into working. And sometimes when I go to write a movie, or even go to pitch a film, I just like to know, for me, the stasis, the beginning, the point of no return, like the end of Act 1, the midpoint where the game changes, the low point where we're furthest from our goal, and then how we achieve the goal. And those 5 or 6 points, to me, give me the confidence to get to the next step and flesh that out and see if it works.
It's really important that all of those points he's talking about, that's also your character is creating them. I can't say this enough. Mm-hmm. Emerging writers write characters generally often who are reacting to the plot that other characters are creating. Then they're not the main character. And if you're writing live action, boy, those actors know it too, by the way. They know if they're creating the plot. So every point he's talking about, the only reason the character's there is because of choices and behaviors and action that they made under pressure that then switched them into that scene.
And the best way to say that too, I think Andrew Stanton said this to me once, was like, if you want to tell your audience who your character is, you have to show your audience the choices they're making. Characters are defined by the choices they make. And sometimes that can lead to characters not making choices, and what I call the not want, which is like, this is a character who does not want this wedding to happen. So it's sort of active, but why do they not want the wedding to happen? What is the real want behind it? And that's the movie, And
what will they do to have the wedding not happen?
Yeah.
Forces them now into behavior, and they create the plot of the movie.
I think what happens a lot is also that, we read screenwriting books and there's a stress on those points, and just isolated from the characters. They tell you, you should do this, and that, and those points are very valuable, and it is math, but at the same time, it works if it's through the characters and their relationships.
Yeah, for me, structure is character movement. That's what structure is. It's telling you where the character is. If you took your favorite 3 movies and then you watch the counter, which is the minutes, and say, okay, how do we meet the main character? What's their world? What do they think about themselves? What's their problem? What's their inciting incident? Where are they at the end of Act 1? What plan do they make? What choices do they make? What goals do they make? Where are they in the midpoint? Where are they at the end of Act 2? Where are they in the climax? Brain will start to see it. Sometimes when you look at your own other movies, it's easier to start seeing that this is just character movement structure. It doesn't mean you don't need structure, but I think to look at it as your character, it kind of puts it together.
And things can inspire that structure. I mean, I know for me, a lot of times something I forget or realize later and look back on is a question I didn't answer. It was like, what is the pain of my main character? Like, what pain do they have at the beginning of this? How does it resolve itself? Does it resolve itself? I know for this film, that question helped me a lot with Joy and just figuring out what is her journey? What's the most emotional journey she can have? Because she's being replaced. And if you kind of lean in so much so to like, okay, I'm Joy, I'm feeling replaced at my job as a parent, right? Just keep escalating the emotional, like how can you make it the worst thing that can happen to her? I mean, there's a shot when they're bottled up at the end of Act 1, and Anxiety says, "I'm so looking forward to working with you, but I'm so sorry, you're just not what she needs anymore." And we go to a close-up of Joy reacting, and that close-up is so important because that is Joy realizing in that moment, like, I'm feeling pain here, and that pain is going to escalate and frustrate her and ultimately drive her through the movie.
In the first movie, when I came on, because they were screening in, somebody said to me, nobody likes Joy. You got to fix that. Nobody likes her. And I was like, okay. But I saw that, so to use an example, when the Goofball Island falls, if you had just seen it fall and then Joy went, "Don't worry, Sadness, I know what to do," and toddled off, you'd be like, "Oh my God, she's a sociopath, and I really don't like her. I really don't like her." But instead, that shot is so important that the island is falling and you're starting to see flashes of what that means. That's just an island. What is that island representing? You're seeing that little goofy girl, right? As a kind of quick clips. And that's what's falling. She's losing her kid. And you have to have a shot on Joy going, "Oh, no, I just broke my kid. I just lost a piece of my kid." And just the overwhelm and the pain coming up and flooding her so that when she goes, okay, no, it's okay. I know what to do. You admire that. I know what to do, right? Versus it pushing you away. And you really have to, even if you just go through your script and look for the pain points, look for the places of that deep vulnerability, right? It's really, really important.
That's beautiful. And who's ready to meet some new emotions? We're going to play an important clip.
That joke, that her not being able to say ennui, was my way of getting that character to be named Ennui.
I'm so glad you did that.
There was really a big concern about using that name. And I'm like, that's why it's funny. Come on, it'll be funny. Because I really wanted to use that name.
My show, Kidding, had a character named Ennui as well. And I went through the exact same Ennui Latriste. Yeah.
That's right.
It's a challenge, but it's worth it.
So what was your approach? You got approached to write a sequel to such an iconic film that you wrote at the beginning, and then you were welcomed as a part of the team. How do you write a great sequel? We have this expansion of emotions, and were you worried that it might be the same story, or what were your first thing that were maybe hard at the beginning to figure out?
Oh yeah, I mean, of course you're worried that it's going to just be the same. I mean, there's a lot of people like our executive producers are Jonas and Pete, Pete the director who directed the first one, and so they really knew intimately the first one, and they kept encouraging us to push, right, and to we have to go new places. Like, what is sequel worthy? Our director, Kelsey, as well, really, really did a deep dive into sequels and knew exactly what he liked about sequels and the sequels he didn't like. So he was very, very conscious of that. And I would say the biggest thing that we had to pitch to Pete Docter was there's new emotions. That is not a slam dunk at all. And I really, maybe even the first time, there was like kind of a head shake, like maybe no to that. Because this is a world and it has rules. And now we have to explain, where have they been? Why weren't they there? Did they have any access? Why aren't they in mom and dad's head? So we wrote scenes where you go into the waiting room to see where they've been, and you see some future emotions that might be coming, and where is that waiting room, and where's the door? Like, you would explain it all and write it, and there's whole sequences of that. We had a whole sequence where because you had to be logical and be true, authentically true too. So when you went down in the waiting room, they just had like a giant button and a fuzzy old 1950s television kind of. They could kind of be part of it. And, you know, you have the main character ask the question, where have you been? Have you had contact? And Anxiety was like, yeah, absolutely. And then she took a magnifying glass and a magnifying glass and onto a memory, and you saw a speck of orange, right? So you could see them in it. But ultimately, you do that and you earn the right to have new emotions, and then you have to say who they will be, and there were many more. And but eventually, you don't need all of that, and you have to know, as fun as it was, that you didn't need it.
But with nostalgia, you also give a glimpse that then, through jokes and recurring moments, it does explain that, you know, there are also upcoming
other ones
emotions,
coming.
You know.
It's important to see nostalgia leave and enter through a door, so you understand that there might be some other things out there we haven't explained yet.
That's wonderful. Let's go to the next clip, because these are all first act clips, and I want to get to the climax and resolution of the film. And we have now a clip with the role of an antagonist. That's very interesting kind of antagonist. Wonderful. A great antagonist, they don't know they're the antagonist. I think that's a great example. And if you can tell us how you thought about anxiety as you were developing the...
I have a specific answer.
Do it.
I always thought about anxiety as Christopher Nolan's assistant. Have I told you this before? No. So I always thought, I was trying to picture how does she present herself in the film? And I always felt she comes on as this big fan of Joy. And she's there to help. I'll do whatever you need, Mr. Nolan. You know, I will get you coffee. I will do whatever. And as she's watching Christopher Nolan, her idol, direct this movie, she realizes, maybe I can do a better job directing this movie. And so I'm just going to keep inserting myself. Oh, so sorry, I didn't mean to touch that, you know, until she realizes, oh my God, Christopher Nolan, he sucks. I got to get him out of here. And I'm going to take over. And then realizes, oh, it's really hard to make a Christopher Nolan film without Christopher Nolan. I'm going to have to get her back. That was the general structure of how I felt about how can she enter the movie likable, right? Because she's an eager fan, an eager assistant. She wants to get her coffee, but ultimately go about it the wrong way. And then this is really about the making of Interstellar. But
We had a lot of versions early on of anxiety and how bad she'd be. She started as a mind worker who was in there in disguise, and they found her lair inside, and that they saw her true shape, and she was a little more antagonistic. She had a buddy named Shame, who is one of the only emotions that the experts will say is probably not good for you, because shame is basically self-loathing. But that didn't quite work because it kept pulling from anxiety, and we really just kept having to calibrate back to how is she relatable? How is she like all of us? How she does think she's doing the best for Riley. She does love Riley. She really believes that she's right, which means you have to go to the main character because, again, we're in Joy's emotional point of view. So you have to be able to know anxiety's emotional point of view, but how is that affecting Joy? And anxiety's not wrong. You know, Joy does embarrass Riley in that locker room. Like she does she still has a childlike joy to her. And we knew when we started the movie that in the first movie we were going to ask Joy, we asked Joy to step back. And in this movie, she was going to have to step forward. And what does that mean? I mean, that's easy to say, and there's a lot about that. But so you kind of, the antagonist is there having their own journey and their own arc. Generally, antagonists don't wake up at their end of Act 2. They choose to stay unconscious. As much as you show them the right way, they probably will choose not, because in some way they are the worst version of your protagonist if they don't wake up. I think anxiety wakes up a little. She'll always be anxiety. She's always going to do her thing. But yes, it's great to have your antagonist have their own. They think they're the hero of the movie.
Awesome. And we're now gonna watch the clip that Dave was talking about, where it's actually the moment where everything changes. And I'm not sure we have that first. Hopefully we'll have that close up so we can look at it now.
We had so many conversations about where that bottle came from. I just can't.
Oh, don't overthink it. Don't overthink it. You know, there are some Looney Tunes rules in Inside Out that you can get away with that other Pixar films cannot, that I thought was so cool. You know, when when the construction crew comes, the demolition crew comes, and the dynamite is just there, and the wick goes off, and you're trying to. It's so Looney Tunes, and it's why my 7-year-old loves the movie. But it's a great rule. Speaking of rules in the sequel, that we had that you could play with. There's so much.
In the first movie, we weren't allowed to even have props.
Wow.
So it was like, Josh Cooley would be like, this is like writing 5 people in an empty Apple store, and they can't leave, and they never go to sleep, and they have no props. And I was like, this is a nightmare. And so finally they were like, okay, he can have a newspaper, he can cut, and that Looney Tunes thing started to come. I never thought of that way, but it's an excellent.
That's a Kelsey word too.
It's an excellent way of thinking about it.
Yeah. Okay, so we now reached the first act break, and let's go to, because we want to allow you to ask some questions in a few minutes. But one of the hardest things to figure out in a screenplay is, of course, the ending, the moment of realization, and then that third act and climax. And I would love to hear about your approach when thinking about the ending. You already shared how important that is. And if you can tell us and give us some practical tips on how to think about our endings.
There's something that comes to mind just in terms of this film, but also a lot of Pixar films, and because it's a struggle sometimes to get to that third act and figure it out. And what I find, especially when you're working on a Pixar film, a Disney film, theme is in the air a lot, heavily. You sort of have an idea of the lesson or the moral or that anxiety isn't a bad guy. You know, I mean, there's lots of things you want to say in a film. And I think there's a big trap in writing backwards from theme and not forwards from what your character wants. Because at the end of the day, it's tempting to wrap in a bow your ending of a film with the exact message you hope to go into it with. But a lot of the times, you just have to go back to that smaller, more specific seed of what does Joy want? What does your main character want? Specifically, physically, is it just to put the sense of self back on the pedestal? You know, things like that I find very centering when you're struggling with an ending, is not to get trapped looking backwards from what's the lesson we want to teach kids, but what is the forward action and want of your main character.
I love that. I remember Mike Jones from Pixar said, never start with a theme. I mean, it's...
Oh, we were just texting.
Yeah,
that's funny.
Okay.
Yeah.
He said that it's a trap. And that's... So let's open up to Q&A.
I have completely the opposite experience.
Oh, no, let's hear it. Yeah, I want to...
I mean, I always am asking, what is this about emotionally, not intellectually? Like when you say theme, when you say kind of theme or moral, or that's an intellectual experience. And I'm not saying you can't have social, intellectual ideas for your movie. You can, but I'm always asking, what is this character going to realize at the end of Act 2 about themselves and their behavior and what they believed or thought at the beginning that is not true, that created this whole act? Well, that is the emotional thematic. That end of Act 2 is your theme, right? What your character, if they're transformative, what they're realizing right in that moment is what this movie's about. It's coming up into consciousness, and then they have to do something in the climax of the movie in order to prove that has happened, right? Because you can realize something, but until you act on it, we don't know if it's how deep it's gone, right? And if you can actually, in the first movie, we had drawings on the wall of the first drawing by Ronnie Del Carmen is Joy keeping the sadness away from the core memories and away from the console, and then there's the image of her handing them over. And sometimes for me, if I can find those emotional thematic images of those poles, she's keeping those away from her, she's handing them over, then I know where we're going, what this is about. It doesn't mean that there aren't days that I'm like, forget it, I'm just going to have fun and do want and try to, because you have to, and do lots of writing exercises. But that was still spoken about
in the language of action, you know?
Yes, that's true. That's true.
And what I also love is that it's not exactly, you know, the realization it becomes more specific. So you explore something that became specific to sadness, and so I think that both approaches are fantastic.
And what's funny, I just have to say, your brain is going to do funny things to you because your brain is trying to bring something into consciousness too. As a writer, it's trying to push you towards something emotional, vulnerable, and your brain will try to start chomping it down because it can feel very dangerous. And so you're going to get notes like, I don't understand this end. Well, that's because your brain bailed on it. So you have a character, and at the end, they get to be a backup singer, and you're like, but she should be the singer. But that, to your brain, that feels very dangerous for some reason, right? That she would take the spotlight, that she would put herself forward, and then sometimes it takes another person on the outside of you for you to trust to say, well, what if? I mean, would she step into the spotlight? And if you feel a big, deep, emotional, like, no, oh boy, you better do that writing exercise, because your brain is trying to keep it away, but there's a lot of power inside of that.
There's something you reminded me too of as a phrase I like to use called chopping down the cherry tree, which is basically just your story is too linear. You know, we can see she's chopping it down. Eventually that tree's going to fall, you know, but so if you get to that ending and you feel like, oh, it's not satisfying that she's the lead singer, maybe you've just been pointing at that the whole movie. And then when it finally arrived, you're like, oh, okay, well, I thought that was probably going to happen, you know, and how do you twist it?
Yeah, because probably in Act 1, her goal wasn't to be the lead singer. Like that's why Act 1 is, right. It has to be different than the poem.
Yeah.
Do you tend to rewrite Act 1 after figuring out the ending?
Well, sure. You don't know your first act until you have your third act. And that's why people get stuck in Act 1 and they rewrite it over and over and over. And I'm like, it's impossible what you're doing, right? Like, it feels good. Act 1s are fun. They're super fun to write. Nobody wants to go write Act 2. So until you get to the third act, just get through the second act, guys. Like, you're going to write 12 drafts of this, if not 15, if not 20. So just write through the second act to get to a version of the third act, and then pull back and look at it and go, okay, now what is this movie, right? And it's only the first draft, guys. Kelsey and I were talking, and there's one image from the first screening of Inside Out 2 within Pixar that's in this movie. One image. It's all gone. Now, it's in the movie because it's stuff we tried. It's stuff that opened up other doors and made us realize stuff. And there's great fun stuff that's gone. But that iterative process, if you're worried about holding on and you're only in your first draft, oh my gosh, let's go. I mean, Andrew Stanton calls it a guitar strum. That's all it is. You're just strumming, because you've got to get it up and out on the page so you can see it. And it feels bad because it's never as good as what's in your head. But that is the process. And the only difference between us and you is that we just keep going.
Something I find helps too for me is that I do a lot of that iterating in the outline. I will not go to script until I have done that guitar strumming in the outline form. And I'm talking about, for a screenplay, maybe a 30-page, single-spaced, very detailed outline. But I will try to, as best I can, find those issues that will come up for me in the third act before I've gotten the script, which works for some people, not for others, but that's always been my thing.
Do you find when you're writing that outline that, because what I always try to get to is my intellectual brain is not the writer. Mm-hmm. The writer is the dreamer. And if your outline is getting too intellectual, I don't mean you, I mean one, and then the dreamer is not even having a chance. And generally, by the time you get to script, the dreamer goes, I don't want to do that. I want to go over here, and out it goes. So do you feel like you're writing something that the dreamer is writing?
I think maybe outline isn't the right word anymore, because it's sort of this script without dialogue, where there's a lot of detail and a lot of imagery, you know, because that gets me excited. Oh, this really cool image at the end of the thing, you know, and when I find that, it's very inspirational, very emotional for me too. And so I think I just like to convince myself in many different ways that I'm not in the script yet, you know? And so I will write, especially for like a TV show. We'll do a half-hour TV show with a 30-page script, 10-page, 12-page outline. That is every beat as everything I would do. So when I have to write that script, it comes out a lot easier, and there's hopefully a lot less big things to fix. I've always found that works for my process.
That's great. So let's start with some questions, and let's go there.
Hi, guys. I have a question about writing for a company, like a big corporation, because I love everything that I'm hearing here, and I think it's hard to apply so much creativity into something that is also looked at as a business. You know, like you have a lot of studio executives who talk about like content and product, which is a word that we frown upon because we don't see this as content and product. So what is it like taking everything that you guys have said and applying it into a movie that's also part of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, and also there's other aspects that go into it like marketing and merchandising. So what is it like for you guys to kind of work in that factory type of space? Can you touch on that a little bit?
I mean, one of the things I loved as a playwright was doing 24-hour theater. And you were given a set of parameters, and you were given 2 props, and you had to have a 10-minute play the next day and whatever. And what I loved about that process were the parameters, and that it's not the same, but when you get into a place like Pixar or Disney, there are a lot of parameters you have to hit. I mean, you can't say the words of products, you can't, there are lots of little challenges. I think those are always going to be there on every level of writing. And the reason why I think you sort of can stomach those at a place like Pixar, obviously, is the potential reach is so huge, and the potential for good is so huge, that I think you just double back on like the essentials of writing a good story and start there, and say, I can fit my worldview in a collaborative environment with other people who are also writing this film. Marketing is the first shot of the film. I mean, marketing is also a big part of storytelling. I mean, all these people go home and say, I worked on this movie. And I think when you enter a process like that, what comes with that from a storyteller's point of view is you have to, it's your responsibility that it's not just your movie. It is everyone's. And you have to find the challenge that keeps you up all night and that is really stressful, is making sure that every scene, every story you're telling in this film passes that test of, does it work for a lot of people?
For me, no, Pixar is a little bubble in the world of this because it's run by filmmakers. So really, the only rule at Pixar is fail fast. They really want you pushing out to something interesting, and that doesn't mean there aren't certain parameters, but it's kind of a little bit of a bubble in the world, Pixar specifically. But if you're working in live action or other places, that's always going to be part of it. But in a way, sometimes that's really good, and it should be good. If you're working in a genre, you're working in a genre, and before you break it, you better know it, and you be able to write it really well as a genre, and then you can break a few things maybe, but that's part of any art form are constraints and limitations. It's how you get some of the best stuff. And if you can kind of think about it like that, instead of, oh, they're messing my thing up. Mm-hmm. Well, you know what? They've made a lot of horror movies, right? They might be experts at it. That doesn't mean you don't have something very personal that you're bringing. What I end up finding out is, what I end up doing is I pick my battles, right? I can't battle every single thing. That's just never going to happen. But I know what really will break the movie. Emotionally, it's not going to work anymore. Nobody's going to care. That makes no sense. And I will pick those battles, and I'll pick the battle that I'm going to die on. I'll pick the hill I'm going to die on. I was going to die on the hill of Inside Out 1, that mom scene where she's sitting on the sleeping bag and she says, "Thanks for being our happy girl." There was a concern that people were not going to like mom. And boy, I was going to die on that hill, because it's why Joy's doing what she's doing. This is why Joy believes she has to keep Riley happy, because it's actually true. She's not a megalomaniac. Mom is saying, "Thank you for being our happy girl." It shifts the whole, it's so important. But, sometimes you're dealing with people who don't see all that deep stuff that you as a writer can see. So that's the hill you die on, right? But you're not saying it like ego-wise, like, you can't change my stuff. You have to walk in and go, okay, let me explain this to you. this and this, and like it's about your story, it's about your characters, and you're explaining it from a story point of view, they will probably go with it because they will hear, oh, wow, no, you're right, that's really important. But now it's still your job to figure out, why did they have that note? And the truth was, it wasn't that scene, it was something before that didn't earn that scene, right? So sometimes it can be not a note just based on a kind of marketing something or other, how many F-bombs you can have in a movie or whatever. But
0.
in this version, yes, but in other live actions. But you might run into that sometimes. But generally, if you stick to the story, they do listen.
Hi. Oh my goodness. Some sadness today, but sadness today. I think for me, one of the questions that I had was some of the phrases, especially like the belief systems. I'm not good enough. I'm a good friend. Even like anxiety being in the dashboard. How did you all make a collective choice on what was being said from Riley's thoughts and frame of mind? Because I know that must have been such a vulnerable thing to say, but yeah. What was the thought process or brainstorming? Like, how did that come all together?
Different ways at different times. It kind of starts with Meg or I writing a script and turning it in, and we talk, ad nauseum about every line, every word, every phrase, every turn of phrase. We bring it into the recording studio, and Amy gets to share her thoughts, and we play around and we tweak and we twist. And I don't think it's necessarily so much a democracy as it is you're all hoping to strike the chord that the director wants to hear, and then when you do, finds its way in the movie.
And there's a lot of a discussion in the beginning about, for Kelsey, why is he making this movie? What's this emotionally about? And your director has to really trust you. You're going to take them down into some pretty hot lava. And, like we said, there might be things that feel embarrassing. So some of the things that Riley, feels, I'm a bad person, I'm a good person, that's all stuff that we have felt. I think that the well of that is your own ability to be brave and say in the room that, well, I felt this way. And Kelsey talking about feeling that way when he was in middle school and how less he felt, and allowing, so it percolates up, and then that dialogue has kind of power to it because it's authentic, it's real.
We have time for one more, and you in the back.
Hello, thank you. This isn't much of a question, but more of a suggestion. You were mentioning about the scene with the giant jar, and that gave you a hard time during production because they kept nitpicking about it or asking questions like, where did the giant jar come from? I've been in that situation similar before, like you just little nitpicking over like tiny little details like that. The thing I've seen is in like a lot of cartoon series, and it always works. It's a simple explanation. It's the I know a guy person. You probably even met one yourself once in your life, just like a person who got their hands on something for you, like something hard to get, like maybe like tickets to a sold out concert. Like, oh, how did you get these? And they'll say, I know a guy.
That's good. That's funny. Thank you.
Can we do one more?
Yeah.
Yes. Let's go with you.
You guys talked about world building. Of course, that's very important in the original and the sequel. What part was your favorite part of world building for the sequel, and what gave you the most struggle?
Gosh, we got to go to so many fun places that aren't even in this movie. Procrastination Land, and we went into Dream Productions, in the writer's room, and saw where the dreams came from for the writer's room, and we just got to go to so many fun places in building that world.
I think the belief system.
I think so too, yeah.
I that was just, even in its pencil sketches, I just thought was such a beautiful and emotional place that had to be seen in the film.
I mean, honestly, everybody talks about anxiety, and she deserves to be talked about. We have an anxiety epidemic, especially in our teenagers. But there is a very, very profound idea in this movie that people aren't talking about yet. I do believe it's going to rise in the conversation as the movie ages, which is that belief system. Because watch the movie again, look what it's saying to you about your sense of self, your idea of who you are. You have the ability to say, is that true? You were bad at math. Well, you actually got a D on one test, and your mother was very disappointed in you. And then forever on, you are bad at math. Is that true? These beliefs are learned from the culture. They're learned from your parents. They're learned from experiences you might have at school or with other people. And they're very, very deep, and they're giving you a sense of yourself and a sense of the world. And there's a lot of power in the idea that you can ask about that. I have a podcast called The Screenwriting Life, and we just had a very famous psychiatrist, Dan Siegel, on, and he talked about this. And it was so powerful to think about where your idea of yourself is coming from. So I just think it's so, so important. And this genius here is the one who figured out how to get it into the film and how it could work. And it's just, I think it's an incredibly powerful, powerful thing sitting in the movie.
Well, David, do you want to add something? Okay, well, so I want to thank you. This one of those beliefs might be that you believe you're not a writer, or maybe you're just an aspiring writer. But if you're writing, then you are a writer, or
you might have written a script and you got really bad notes and it sucked, and so you say, well, then I guess I'm not a writer. And we're like, no, that means you are a writer. First drafts suck. That is their job. Their job is to be bad so that you can find out what doesn't work and what does work. They just have to keep going.
Writing is just a constant series of failures, and you get one success at the end. I mean, it's true. I mean, that's what this film is, the struggle with it, and the challenge of it is, it's not this until the end. It is a lot of, well, that's wrong. Well, that's wrong. That looks good now, but that's wrong. You're always focusing on what needs improvement, which is anxiety inducing, yes. But that's writing. It's a strive for perfection, but you have to like the strive because it's never going to begin easy. It ends easy, but...
And it will never be perfect.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't give their work out because they say, well, it's not good enough or it's not perfect. And it's like, well, perfection is the enemy of art. It literally kills it. Mm-hmm. If you're striving for perfection, you're killing your story before you start.
Enemy of art, friend of my mother. But yes, it's...
So, well, thank you to the Animationist Film Festival. Thank you for Disney and Pixar. And thank you to Meg and Dave for coming here. And this has been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Animationist Film. This was awesome. You've just learned from the writers of the film. But now let's continue discovering fascinating making-of insights from character designer Diana Marsigliese, who explains her personal and surprising inspiration behind the design of anxiety. So click here now and I'll see you there.